Thank you again for attending us today. We'll give about 1 more minute for attendees to log in so they don't miss anything, but just in case, we will be recording it so we can access it later. Okay, we're going to go ahead and jump in just for the sake of time. Welcome to our SSRS overview webinar today. We really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy day to join us. My name is Elizabeth Wojcik, and I am the Director of Client Strategy and Development at CSI. I've worked with CSI for almost 4 years now, but have been working with iMIS for almost 10. So I will, at this point, turn it over to my co-presenter to allow her to introduce herself.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I am Tricia Hawes. I am fairly new to CSI. I started in my role as application consultant almost a year ago. Not quite there yet, but I have been using iMIS for about 6 years now. So yeah, still fairly new to CSI, but familiar with iMIS.
Great, thanks, Tricia. So for those of you on the call that may not work with CSI on a daily basis, I just kind of wanted to give a quick plug about a few things about CSI. CSI has been working with iMIS for over 25 years, and so we're one of the oldest and most experienced iMIS implementation partners. We focus on iMIS implementation and support, so we probably work with many of you on this call from a daily basis on using your system to the fullest extent and reaching those projects and goals that you want our help on. Of course, we always like to brag about some awards that we've won and consistently win on our performance in the iMIS community. But overall, we want to continue to strive to meet our daily needs of our clients and give them the best support that we can. Okay, so today we've chosen to cover SSRS, and mainly in the amount of time we have today, we're only able to give you an overview of what SSRS is and what it can do for your organization. We hope this will help you decide how you should be using SSRS and also motivate you to continue your learning to make those goals and how you're going to use SSRS possible. So we're not going to teach you all the ins and outs because we might be here for hours and hours, but we're going to give you a glimpse of what you can do, and hopefully we'll be able to continue this webinar series to even further your training in this product. So first of all, let's talk about what SSRS is. SSRS stands for SQL Server Reporting Services and is server-based. It's very much like Crystal, but much more advanced. So when you create a Crystal report, it produces an RPT file. When you produce an SSRS report, it produces an RDL file. SSRS is going to give you the ability to pull complex reports while allowing you the flexibility in styling, as well as even output options, which we'll cover today. And just remember, Crystal is no longer supported within the iMIS staff site. So while you still may be able to use Crystal as a product, you should consider converting those reports to SSRS or IQA for long-term use as well as support. Remember that the iMIS desktop is soon going to go away, so those reports that you're running in desktop now need to have an alternative once you convert fully to the staff site. Okay, so why should we use it? We've covered a little bit of this, but again, SSRS is considered the replacement for Crystal as the report engine for iMIS. If any of you have seen the latest version of iMIS 2017, you'll notice that ASI has included lots and lots of SSRS reports. I think there's over 100. SSRS automatically is included in your SQL Server license, so it doesn't cost you any more money. But certainly if you are upgrading Crystal and continuing your licensing there, that does cost your organization money. SSRS has much more enhancements than Crystal, and in many cases can offer you some easier flexibility over IQA. IQA is a great tool within the staff site to get those easy kind of list reports or maybe some graphs, but SSRS kind of lets you take it to that next level to give you the analysis reports you need. Based on my experience, SSRS can also offer better speed in producing reports compared to IQA. Again, if it's an IQA report that is going to produce a lot of data, sometimes you can see some speed issues within that report, and SSRS can alleviate that as well. Okay. But before we jump into even more, we're going to talk about, let's backtrack a little bit and think about when you are creating reports today, even in Crystal or any kind of tool that you're using. I always want to give reminders about what you should be training your staff to give you in order to meet their need. You don't want to have a lot of back and forth when somebody needs a report, because more than likely they need it ASAP. So giving them some helpful information to help you get them the report they need is going through a requirements gathering phase. So you want to ask them, and they also want to be thinking about this before they even give you a request, is what should the report look like? When you're finished with building the report, what should it look like? What should the format be? This is typically a challenging piece because a lot of the requests that you get, they may not necessarily be thinking about the end goal. So you may be working to build a report and it may not always have the vision necessary to help you get started on the right foot. So be prepared to rinse and repeat several times to accomplish your goals. Even mocking up a paper or Excel document can be helpful. Eventually you may work with someone frequently enough that has that, less back and forth. But always asking them, what are you ultimately going to be doing with this report? As well as who is the audience? Who will be receiving this data once the report is finished and published out there for access? So is it going to staff? Is it going to volunteer or board members or just members as a whole? This can really affect how that report looks, because while for staff you may use some acronyms that staff know and love and understand, but members may not know those acronyms, so you need to make sure the report is member friendly and knowing the terminology that they would know and understand. Always ask, we talked about IQA, should you be using SSRS? Is that the right tool for what the report is asking for? Would this be better in a different format like IQA or an IQA graph or something like that? So these are all questions that you want to give your staff to say, hey, this is going to make it a whole lot easier and I'm going to be able to serve you faster if you give me this information in advance. On the other side, so say you need to call CSI for assistance with a report, these are also the questions we're going to ask you. Because again, we want to provide you the information that you've requested in the most efficient way. You providing this information up front makes it possible to get that report to you timely and correct. Okay, we're going to take another step back, and one thing that I always think about when I'm writing reports is it's really helpful if you are a consistent database manager that have had a consistent process with updating fields and updating tables in your database. Now, some of you on the call may be new to your position and are taking over maybe some inconsistent methods of previous database managers. So it's important for you to know and understand your database, what is in there currently, because you need to know where things are stored in order to get the data into a report. So we need to take that step back and review those best practices. So even if you're still maybe in some cleanup mode from previous staff members, let's make sure we're doing a consistent process going forward. This is going to be extremely helpful when you're producing those reports. You can easily identify the correct table. This is also going to be helpful for you when you start training staff to write IQAs and helping them know and understand where the data is stored. So for tables, I always say let's start with a prefix. Demo, standing for demographic, is the typical prefix for custom tables. That pretty much guarantees you're not going to name a table the same as what ASI is going to name a table. So you want to make sure it has a prefix. If it's a demo, if it's your company acronym, whatever it is, just make sure it's unique and you're consistent with naming your tables. It's also very helpful with sorting. When you're looking at your database tables in your list, they will all sort together. So you know all your custom tables are sorted starting with demo or your acronym, and they're all right there together rather than having to scroll through hundreds and hundreds of tables. Also, table names should be in upper and lower case. There's a reason for this in having the table name upper lower and the field name in all caps. That's because in a SQL script or view, you can easily see what terms are relating to a table and what terms are relating to a field. Again, it's just helping you down the road from a troubleshooting aspect. If you have a consistent method, you can easily see that's a table and that's a field. Table names, fields should also have a prefix according to the table name. So if you have an opt-in field, for example, and I have it in demo communication, and I also have an opt-in field in demo personal, when you pull that opt-in field into a report, you're going to have a hard time telling, well, which one is that from? You know, which field is from what table? So adding a prefix in front of each field name helps you identify, oh, that's from the communication table. So you can see the example on the screen. I have CM underscore opt underscore in. I can tell that is from my demo communication table, and that is the opt-in field. Also, just a reminder about no spaces, only underscore, and just also a quick tip of underscores are typically accepted across the board in iMIS. Sometimes there are areas of RISE that doesn't like any type of special character at all. So you may want to start a method of not using any spaces or special characters in codes. Again, just produce that consistency going forward. If you want to clean up past table builds, you are welcome to, but just be very, very cautious. Starting from now going forward is also a good method. Okay, so let's talk about ways or tools that are going to allow you to create those SSRS reports. So there's two ways or two tools, if you will, that make it possible for you to create those SSRS reports. One is called Visual Studio and one is called Report Builder. You can see we put some screenshots here. Depending on version, your screen may look a little bit different, maybe from a color perspective. But these are two fine tools to be able to update reports, create reports, and so forth. Me personally, I prefer Visual Studio. I feel like it's much easier to navigate around to the different areas where I can do edits to that report. So Report Builder is something that's an end-user tool within Visual Studio that the developer can utilize full capabilities. They don't always have the same results. So again, I prefer Visual Studio because I have all the capabilities there. Now, Trisha's going to go over how to install Visual Studio if you don't have it, but it is a free product. It comes with your SQL Server license. It may already be on your SQL Server, but you can get it to other places if needed. So without further ado, Trisha, take it away.
Yes, so you've compared Visual Studio and Report Builder, and you've decided you're going to move forward with Visual Studio, but you don't know if you already have it installed. And the best way to find this out is to look in your Start menu. Usually, you're going to find it within one of the Microsoft SQL Server folders. So you may not see it right off the bat. You may have to dig a little bit. But within one of those folders, you should find SQL Server Data Tools for Visual Studio. If you go looking and you don't find it, you can go out and download it. It's easy to do. You just want to make sure that you download the version that is compatible with your version of SQL. So if you're not the technical contact in your organization, your IT person should be able to help you determine what version of SQL you're using to determine what version of SSDT you want to download. There's also a really helpful guide on Microsoft's website that will walk you through that process. Do know that you're going to need admin credentials to install Visual Studio. But once it's all installed and set up, you don't need admin credentials to keep using it or build reports. So again, you may need to have your IT person get all set up for you. But once you're set up, you're ready to roll, you won't need them anymore. Before we kind of start going through the process to building reports, I am also going to take some step backs to talk a little bit about the terminology. We've said a lot of different things already on this call, and then we'll also talk a little bit about the structure and the environment before we dive into report building. So starting here, we're going to start with Visual Studio. Visual Studio is a development environment. It supports many code languages, and this is where SSRS reports are created. BIDS, which stands for Business Intelligence Development Studio, includes reporting services, but this did change names in SQL 2014. It's called SQL Server Data Tools Business Intelligence, SSDT BI. So just because this wasn't all confusing enough, they did go ahead and do a little name switcheroo to throw everybody off. And SSRS stands for SQL Server Reporting Services. This is free with all SQL Server installs, as Elizabeth mentioned, and can also be downloaded for free. One thing to note is that there are some big differences between versions, particularly if you go from 2005 to 2008 R2. So if you're upgrading and you go from 2005 to 2008 R2, you're going to see some big differences in functionality. You know, we're all familiar that when you upgrade software, you usually get a theme change or, you know, an upgraded color scheme, but the functionality kind of stays the same. But that's one jump where there is some major differences. So just be aware of that. And along those lines, if you have multiple staff members in your organization that are using the product, you're going to want to make sure that everyone is on the same version. Otherwise, if you have two staff members, each on a different version, each working on one report, each time one opens it, it's going to be upgraded and downgraded, upgraded and downgraded each time it's open between the two staff members. So that can be really frustrating. So you just want to make sure you are uniform in what version everybody is using. Continuing along in our getting familiar with SSRS, we're going to talk a little bit about the structure of SSRS reports. Three pieces: the solution, the project, and the RDL. The solution is the umbrella that all of the projects reside under. So we're going to talk a little bit about projects in a minute, but know that the solution is kind of the overarching piece. It's easy to think of it as it's the parent to multiple project children. If you don't define your solution first, the solution name is going to be the same as the first project you create. So you cannot create a project without it being in a solution. And if you try to, it's going to name that solution the same as your project. So projects, to continue along that path, a project is a group of reports that have a common purpose. So think of it like membership or orders. It kind of is going to become how your organization prefers to set up their projects. I've seen different things. You know, some organizations use their departments. So they have an accounting project or a store project or membership. It's really going to be your preference. Once you do establish how you want to organize those projects, though, come up with a naming schema. That way, years from now, when you win the lottery and you're not there anymore, it's easy for the next person to carry on and keep the stream going. Projects contain reports. They also contain data sets and data sources. And we'll talk about both of those things a little bit further on, but there are multiple pieces to a project. And last, RDL. So RDL, we touched on this a little bit at the beginning, stands for Report Definition Language. It is the extension that an SSRS report has when it's built. So similar to that Crystal reports that end in .rpt, SSRS reports end in .rdl. In iMIS, if you are in the staff site and you've been building things out there, you may have run across the reporting services template. RDL corresponds to that reporting services template. Okay, so the screenshot here is a little snippet of the inside of Visual Studio. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the different panes that you see in here and what you'll find in each. So we're going to start over here with the Solution Explorer. And the Solution Explorer is where you find all of your projects within your solution and all of the reports that are contained within those projects. On this side of the screen, you have your report data pane. And the report data pane has several pieces of the report building process. It starts with parameters, and parameters are pieces of your report that you can create that allow your end users to filter the report on the fly each time they run it. They can filter for a particular date range or a member type or a state, depending on what kind of report you're creating. So you can hard code those filters into your report when you're creating your query, or you can set them up as parameters to allow the end user to really slice and dice the data in the way that suits them. So it just allows a little more flexibility for them. Also within that report data pane is our data sets and then fields that go with the data set. So a data set is created by the query that you set up when you're building a report. And within each data set is a list of fields. So what columns you're grabbing from what tables in your database. All are within that report data pane. Also on that side of the screen, you have your toolbox. The toolbox is essentially the building block of your report. Everything within the toolbox is the bones. So your data set is your guts, you know, it's the query, it's the guts, it makes it happen, but the toolbox has the structure. It has your tables or lists, graphs, charts, gauges, all of that information is stored within the toolbox, and it's really easy to click and drag pieces over to the design pane and build out your report. The properties pane is where you can go to adjust any of the formatting for your report and for your data. It really is pretty intuitive, but you can edit currency styles, change the date format, change font colors, change background colors, add borders. You think it, you can probably do it here in the properties pane. But one good thing to note about SSRS, for properties and for other things, there are several ways to skin that cat. You know, you can also right click on your data to format it, or there's a a toolbar up in the top ribbon that you can use to format it. So if you're not finding something there, there's a chance that it's also somewhere else that it might be easier for you to track down. And last but not least, the Server Explorer. The Server Explorer is the server management console for Visual Studio. You can use this window to open up data connections, log on to servers, and explore databases. It's not an area that you'll use a whole lot, but I did just want to call it out while we were looking at all of the pieces. So we've talked a lot about the environment and the structure, but what happens to the reports once they're built? Where do they go to live? This is a really good time to flash back to what Elizabeth was talking about with requirements gathering. This is so important. This piece of where is my report going to live once it's built is so important to determine before you get started building your report. And the second question that goes hand in hand with that one is who's going to access the data? You know, where is it going to live and who's going to use it? Because there are different places that you want to store those reports depending on the answer. So RISE is a great tool that can be an external way to give access to reports to staff members and to non-staff members. So for non-staff members, if you have reports in RISE, you can create a website in RISE of those reports, create an IQA that places those non-staff members into a group, and then you give that group access to the website with the reports. You could even go as far as specifying security by menu item so that you can give different users unique report lists. So different users can access different reports within that website. On the flip side of that, the Report Manager is a web-based report access and management tool, but it's for staff access to reports. It's only going to work inside your network. So you can use the report server or the Report Manager to browse report server folders, search for specific reports. You can view reports out here and their general properties. You can look at past copies of reports and when they were updated in the report history, just in case you're noticing a change. You go and see, oh, this report was updated a few days ago. I wonder why this data has changed. Depending on what permissions a staff member has for the Report Manager, they may also be able to subscribe to reports, meaning, and we'll talk more about this later on, but they would be able to have reports delivered to their email inbox or a shared folder on the network at a schedule that they choose. So there's a lot of power in the Report Manager, but it's going to be internal. And I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth now, and she's going to talk about a third way that you can also look at reports.
Thank you, Tricia. And just a plug for Report Manager, that's probably my favorite piece because it's a really easy way to share data. And it's just a display for the reports. It's not putting your reports in a different location from a storage perspective, but it's a great way to easily share reports rather than having to have Visual Studio on every computer. So also another way, just to give you an example of, there may be other tools out there that you're using that can use the Microsoft Report Viewer within the site. So I'm showing you an example here from our iMIS product, the Interactive Chapter Experience. This is also using SSRS reports to display data back out to the chapter or organization or whoever is using iMIS. So just giving you an example of, there may be other resources out there that can allow you to share that data in a secure method. So while we can do it in iMIS, we could do it in RISE, as Tricia showed you. You may also have different products that could do that viewer control within it. Okay, so let's talk about some different ways to create and modify reports. So my favorite part about SSRS is the report wizard. It is like your little friend holding your hand that literally walks you through creating a report for the very first time. So again, as we go through some more training on SSRS, we will be using the report wizard. Some of you at some point may decide to no longer use the wizard, and those are typically those that are really comfortable in SQL code that don't need that step-by-step process. But even if I've been using SSRS for 10 years, I still use the report wizard today. It just helps you not to miss anything, in my opinion. So when you create reports, you're going to create a folder where all of those RDL files will be saved. And as Tricia mentioned, that a good way, especially if you're going to have multiple people editing reports, is to put those RDL files on a network drive that can be accessed by multiple computers or servers. Again, Visual Studio does not have to be on your SQL server, although it's there by default. You could install it on your local machine, on a terminal server, which we really highly recommend because it's not great to access your SQL server or app server on a daily basis for risk of doing some harm there. So putting it out on a terminal server or your local machine, as long as it can connect to the SQL server, then you're good to go. So that just allows multiple people to have that Visual Studio product on their machine and get to the same RDL file. You don't want to have multiple folders of I'm saving my reports here, another person's saving their reports here. So you don't want to overwrite anything that you've already done. Keep it in a central location so you're editing the same file. When you want to clone a report, this is always a great way, and I've talked about those SSRS reports that ASI has put into the latest version of iMIS. Hey, if those reports look good and they get you almost to what you need in that report, clone that report. Use what they've already given you and make your edits. So you would make a copy of that RDL file, do a save as, and rename it to give it your specific customized name. That's also a safety net for future upgrades so that you won't lose any of the reports that you've customized for yourself. So make sure you are, when you have a report you want to clone, save yourself some steps, save as, rename it. So you can create that report with a report wizard, but if you have a SQL Wiz, again, you don't necessarily always have to use the wizard. But again, I use it to this day. As you may know, Crystal will produce a SQL query. You can go into a Crystal report and view the SQL query that it produces, but that's not always the same language as what SSRS is using. So if you have a Crystal report, for example, that you want to convert to SSRS, it's not as easy as just going in and copying that SQL code because some of the language is slightly different. Now, it certainly will get you very far and use it certainly as a guide as you're building your report. But to give you an example, one of the Crystal languages that it uses is one of. So if you want to say this field is one of and giving it multiple values, you can do that. But in SSRS, it wants straight SQL terminology. So in SSRS, that interpretation would be in, I-N. So the field, in, and then parentheses with your multiple values that it's in. So you just want to be cautious, again, when you're converting those Crystal reports. But I always say take it as an opportunity to really freshen up those Crystal reports to make them even better than they were in Crystal when you convert them to SSRS. So back to you, Tricia.
Okay, we are nearly to the report creating stage, but there are just a few last bits of information to talk about before you dive in. So we're all working in iMIS, so it's important to talk about iMIS table structure and how it's going to relate to how you build SSRS reports. So as we are all aware, that primary table in iMIS is the name table. It contains all of our name, address, category, demographic information for all of our members and contacts that we keep track of in iMIS. So all of the iMIS modules interact with and pull information from that table. The other main table in iMIS that supports membership processing is that activity table. So it contains records to track historical and participation details like meeting attendance, committee service, dues payments, product purchases, the list goes on and on. So the information in that activity table is normally used for analysis or marketing. SSRS uses basic SQL statements as the foundation for all of their reports. The SQL select statement queries data from tables like name or activity in the iMIS database. Select statements have 3 clauses: a select, from, and where. The select statement begins with select and specifies the table columns that you're going to be retrieving. So name, first name, last name, chapter, that's what's coming in your select statement. The from clause, which comes second, specifies what tables are being accessed. So in this case, we're saying from name. And the where clause, which is optional, the where clause specifies which table rows we're going to use. So we could say where member type equals alum. If you don't add a where clause onto the end of your SQL statement, it's going to return all of the rows from the table. So like we talked about parameters earlier, this is where you would hard code that filter in if you did not want to give your end users the ability to slice and dice the data on the fly. We are primarily going to talk about tabular style reports today, but there are a couple of other styles that I did just want to mention. There are matrix style reports, and there are also list style reports. So tabular is your standard row and column report, looks like an Excel doc. Matrix reports, so for your Crystal users, it's similar to a crosstab report, and data can be grouped by rows and columns. Tables and matrix data regions can display some really complex data relationships, but they have a tabular layout, and their data can come from a single data set built on a single data source. So one data set, one data source for both of those. The key difference between tabular and matrix reports is that tables can only have row groups, but matrix reports can have row groups and column groups. That's the key difference there. List reports are a little different from both of those. They're a lot more free-form. They can include multiple tables, multiple matrices, and each can use a different data set. Lists are really great to use for form style reports like an order invoice, or if you have a form on your website that members are filling out and you want to return the data just the way it looks as they fill it out, a list report is really great for that. So once you've determined which of those styles of report that you're going to be building to meet your end goal, you're always going to have the same first 3 steps. You're going to create a solution, you're going to create a project, and then you're going to set up a shared data source. So your solution, again, just to recap, the best way to think of your solution is like My Documents, and a project is like a folder within My Document, within your My Documents folder, and then your reports are the files within that subfolder. I just wanted to throw this out there. We aren't going to walk through creating that solution or project, but it's a little counterintuitive when you're in Visual Studio and you want to set up a new solution. You have to go to New Project. There isn't somewhere that says Create New Solution. It is all under New Project, and within that window that pops up, there is an option to create a blank solution, which I have a screenshot of in here. But it can be a little tricky to find. remember that when you're defining new projects, you're creating a project for a group of reports that have a common subject or a common user group, so sales report or membership rosters. And once you have your solution and project set up, then you're going to create that shared data source that I mentioned. I'm going to talk a little bit about shared data sources. I say shared because you do have two options when you create a data source. They can be shared or they can be embedded. My opinion here and what I feel is the best practice is it's okay to share data sources. Just be mindful of the fact that the data source that you set up to share is being used by all of the reports in your project. So if you're an organization that frequently flips between test and live when you're creating new things to see how the data is working, if you have test data in your test database and you want to see it in your new report, set up two shared data sources. Set up a test data source and a live data source. And that way you don't have to manipulate the data source, you can just split between the two of them. That being said, shared data sets can be quite dangerous for the same reason of data sources. That data set that you create and share is being used by all of the reports in your project. So if you create a data set that is very specific to one report and you're sharing it and you're using it in another report, but just realize that you actually need a different field in your other report, and so you edit the data set and add the new field and remove some fields, you've just now affected every single report in your project, and something is broken somewhere else that may not be found, and it can be kind of tricky to track down and figure out what's going on, and it all stems back to it being a shared data set. So I do not recommend sharing data sets, but data sources that point to a database are not a problem. Okay, Elizabeth talked about the Report Wizard, and it is a great tool that comes right out of the box with SSRS. I will throw out there that generally a lot of reports that you create using the wizard aren't going to go above and beyond the most basic report development requirements. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't start with the wizard. It can help you get a report up and running with zero code, zero property setting, and the resulting report is a really great starting point for more complicated reports. So once you've created a report with the wizard, you're free to go back in and modify it and add those complicated pieces to it. So it's a really helpful tool for beginning to advanced users. As Elizabeth mentioned, we both still use it all the time just because it's a down, quick and easy way to get a report built. That being said, we did want to show you what it looks like to build a report with the wizard, but for the sake of time, we're going to show this video, and I'm going to talk along with it. So as you can see in the video, I've already set up my sample solution, sample project, and my shared data source. So to start, I'm going to right-click on my sample project and go down to Add and choose New Item. And once I'm in here, you're going to choose Report Wizard and then give your report a name. Once you do that and click Add, the Report Wizard kicks off and you're ready to get started. So you click Next here. And on this screen, you have the option to choose to use your shared data source that you've already set up, or alternatively, you can create a new data source right from the wizard. In this case, I want to use my shared data source, so I'm going to choose that and click Next. On this screen, this is where you would either paste in existing SQL code or type in if that's how you're comfortable working, or you can use the query builder to design your query. In the query builder, this is the Add Table button. If you click that, it opens up a window for you to choose what tables you want to use. I'm going to create a membership roster here. So I'm going to grab the name table and choose add. And then I'm going to grab name address and click add. And once I close this window, you'll see that the wizard was kind enough to create a join for me between name and name address on ID. But this isn't the join I want. So I'm going to right click on this. And then I'm going to choose remove and get rid of that join. So instead, what I'm going to look for in the name table is mail address num. And I'm going to select that and drag it over to address num. And when I release my cursor, it creates a new join for me. So now that my join has been created properly, I can select which fields I would like to have appear in my report by marking the appropriate checkboxes next to the fields in the tables. So from name, I'm going to grab ID, member type, category, status, and full name. From name address, I'm going to grab address 1 and 2, and then city, state, zip, and country. And you'll see down below that the query has been written out for you down here. So if you're interested in adding that where clause, adding those filters, you do have the option to click in this box and start typing. Alternatively, if that's not where you're comfortable, you can find the fields in this graph above and then add your filters to the filter column here. So I want my membership roster to only include those members from Chicago, Illinois. So I'm going to type Chicago in the city and Illinois in the state. And as you can see, I typed mine in plain with no formatting. And as soon as I tab out, the wizard formats those for me so that I don't have to worry about it. Once your query is all set up and ready to go, you can use the red exclamation point at the top of the window to run your query. This is a really great way to make sure that the data being returned is what you would expect from your database. If not, you can go back and edit your query. Once you've verified, click OK, and you'll see that the query string is now populated with that query that you just built, and you can click Next. On this screen, you're choosing between creating a tabular or a matrix style report. So for our membership roster, we're going to stick with tabular and click Next. This screen is really great because it allows you to choose fields you want to group on and what fields you want to display in the details of your report. So for me, I don't want to group on any of these fields, but I do want to display all of them on my report. So I'm going to use my Shift key on my keyboard, select all of these, click the Details button, and move everything over. And click Next. This screen has some pre-built templates that you can use to add the pretty factor to your report. Alternatively, you could use the generic style and manually format your report to match your organization style guide. So I'm going to choose Slate for mine and then click Next. And this is the final page of the wizard. So what's on this screen is a report summary of everything you've just done, your data source, your connection. If you forgot to give your report a name at the beginning of the wizard, you do have the option to do that here. And the last thing on here, this preview report checkbox, when it's marked, once you click finish, it will automatically open up your report in preview mode so you can see what it looks like. So I'm going to mark mine and then click finish. And it will take a second to spin together. But once it renders, you're going to see just how fast it is to create a simple membership roster using the report wizard. And that's not to say that if you want to make some changes, you can't go back in the design pane, use the properties panel to edit and format, or go into your data set and edit your query to change your filters or add parameters instead. And that's how easy it is to use the report wizard. So really quickly, since we were talking about filtering, I did want to talk about some of the basic filter examples that you will use when you build SSRS reports. Again, want to call out for Crystal users, there are some syntax changes when you make the change to SSRS. There are some pretty key differences, specifically with in instead of, is one of, or not in, which we have here on the screen. And I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth to talk to you a little bit about what else SSRS can do for you.
Thank you, Tricia. So what we've given you, again, being an overview webinar only, is just a glimpse of what SSRS can do, but it can do a whole lot more. Again, we could be here for hours and hours giving you examples, but here are some just examples of what else it can do. You know, rosters is what she gave you an example of, printable, exportable, you know, those pretty versions that we want to give our members to be able to export. Mailing labels is also a great use. We can also do some really fancy stuff with SSRS in calling a store procedure as a data source. We can also use an existing IQA. So some of you who have already gotten some progress in using IQA, you can also use it as a data source within your report. You can also have the report execute a store procedure. So if you need some actions to happen after the report is produced, you can do that. And then some really impressive things that can really take you to the next level in organizing your organization's performance is dashboards. SSRS reports can be very helpful to get that display into a format that makes it more presentable and useful in that analysis. As I said before, if you want to use SSRS with iMIS, if you're using IQA reports in your staff site, you can use these IQAs within your SSRS reports. So if you have those created, you have a one-step to your advantage. And then you can display those reports in your staff site. This can be useful for those complex reports that may not, you know, work great or look great in IQA, as well as I mentioned before about the speed issues. It can be very helpful. There's also an option to embed Report Manager within your iMIS desktop. Now, this is certainly useful today now that the desktop is still there. You know, ASI has said that they plan to produce a version that no longer uses the desktop by the end of this year. We can certainly check in with them on their status on that. But for those of you that are still working in the desktop and want to display some easy access to your Report Manager reports, you can also embed it there for easy access. Another plug for Report Manager is the subscriptions option. Tricia mentioned just a little bit about this, but this was also a very frequently used item when I was using SSRS to give my users access to data. So it offers a way to share reports via subscription where you can either save to a network drive or send an email on a schedule. So again, producing that automation so you as a staff member don't have to remember to send a report to someone per their request. So you can point to a report that can be run unattended. Again, it's going to send the refreshed version of the report, so it will be real-time data. Specifying that delivery method, it could be those direct email addresses. You can also CC people, but it is just for internal use. A rendering extension to present the report in a specific format. So if you want it to be attached to the email as well as display in the email, you could do both or either. Usually the conditions for running a report are time-based. So for example, you may want to run a particular report every Tuesday at 3 p.m. However, if the report runs as a snapshot, you can specify that that subscription runs whenever the snapshot is refreshed. So a couple different ways to send that. For example, I used it to send an email to get a snapshot at right after midnight to get the data that is currently available. You can also add parameters when running the report. You can have them optional or specified to give, again, that recipient exactly what they need to, analyze or do some function for your organization. Note that subscription information is stored with the individual report in the report server database. You cannot manage subscriptions separately from the report to which they are associated. The subscriptions cannot be extended to include descriptions, other common text. So it's a very, very simple method of sending the data. So again, that's why it's best used for internal communication. Okay. So we're nearing the end of our webinar, and we want to thank you again for attending. And we apologize for not being able to take questions at this time. We knew we would only have enough time to give you, again, that glimpse of SSRS. But don't be alarmed. We will answer your questions as well as give you opportunities to learn more. Like I said, we could be here for hours and hours. So we are exploring a webinar series on continued training on how to use SSRS. We want to help you learn this tool and really start using it. So hopefully we can have continued webinars where you can actually be playing with your own data as we go along, and we can walk you through the process step by step. So we want to hear back from you. We want to know if this is something that you'll be interested in. We will be sending you a survey after this webinar is complete, and we have some questions in that survey to ask you about your interest in that type of webinar series. So we want to know, would you participate? Would it be valuable to you? We want to make sure that we're offering something that you can take with you and use. So we, again, appreciate it. Thank you, Tricia, for doing this webinar with me. We hope you all have a good rest of your Tuesday and a good rest of your week. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.